All right, I hit record and we are this is a JP joint.
Yeah.
JP joint.
How's it going?
Uh I don't know if that was the theme song or not. I don't remember.
I don't. It doesn't matter, does
We
it?
haven't done one since November, so I'm not sure what the theme song is anymore. Yeah, and at JP Joints, we are discussing craft books that one of us
Good.
has read and the other one has not.
Yeah, that's
And this
true.
week I have not read.
Correct.
So you get to teach me a book, which I'm excited about.
Yeah. Yeah. Um.
And
What
I
I
get to
would.
make snide comments
Yeah.
this
Great.
time. Yeah.
Good. But like, how are you? How's life? Can we have any sort of like
No, we're going
conversation
right into it.
beforehand?
I'm
No, we
sorry.
gotta dive right in. Okay, fine. I'll
No,
just.
I'm just kidding. We can. How is life? Um, I did make reference. I was telling you before we hit recorded. This is my fifth Zoom call today.
Yeah,
So
I can tell.
yeah, people are always like, "What's it like to have a side hustle? How do you get everything done that you want to get done?" Well, you start having Zoom calls at 8 o'clock in the morning
Hmm.
on Saturday,
Hmm.
and you keep having them until what time is it?
Hmm.
1:45 when we started recording this.
Hmm.
So I'm good. I'm a little I love having Zoom calls with our authors, so they really fuel me, but it means that with each one I get a little more manic.
Yeah.
So you're getting the
Great.
most manic Jeff
Great.
of
That's
all manic
amazing.
Jeffs. Yeah. Woohoo! Yeah, so that's how that's going. My kitchen's almost done. Countertops
Good.
come on Monday, which will relieve the chaos of my house being a construction zone, which it has been since November. I'm trying to think how else I'm doing. I think that's all that I can think about. Otherwise, I'm
We
fine.
did.
I'm taking my wife on a date tonight. That's really nice.
Ooh,
Yeah, we were looking at I
very
actually
special.
Googled great places to eat in Baltimore, and I got a foodie menu for like, hey, if
Ooh,
you're a foodie, here's the places you should go in Baltimore. And I was like, oh, fantastic. So
ooh,
we're gonna go to one of those tonight. I'm very excited.
ooh,
Yeah.
very nice.
How about you? How are you doing?
Well, for one, we released a workbook, which is pretty cool, but that's fine. We can skip over that.
Yeah. Oh, we did release a workbook.
Yeah, we did.
We did.
Like,
And it's
you know,
great. It's
9
really
days ago.
nice. Oh my gosh, 9 days ago. And
Great
it's really
workbook.
nice. It's awesome. And it has cool cartoon bubbles that you invented in
Yeah.
it, which are
Yeah.
fun.
I mean, I didn't invent them. I used Canva, but
You created them.
again,
You put
through
faces, you
Canva.
took
I
bubbles and put
basically,
faces on them, and it's fantastic.
Canva is kid pics for adults. And for anyone that gets that reference, you are the right person.
You you are one of us. Yeah, we did have a workbook
Um,
come out. And we have a
yeah, we
dialogue
did.
dash coming in a month. And it's
Yeah.
going to be great. April 1st, we're kicking off 80 days of planning, writing, and um, editing. And it is $1 a
Hmm.
day. And it
Hmm.
is expanding from what we did in the fall beyond just having a
Hmm.
single main character. You can also come and have multiple main characters. And we're designing a
Hmm.
new workbook just for that. So that's also
Yeah.
cool.
And we literally less than less than 15 minutes ago ended our mastermind
We
for
did.
multiple POVs
We
in
did.
which we developed those additional pages for the workbook.
We did.
So,
Yeah. And the multiple POV mastermind, I would say, was a stunning success.
agreed. It was
It was
very
wonderful.
nice.
A lot of
It was
people got help.
awesome.
A lot of people,
Hmm.
yeah. I had a great time. That's really all that matters, whether I have
Yeah.
fun. And I had a
Hmm.
blast. So,
Good. Um, but no, other than that, today I'm very similar to you. I started being in front of a camera at 5:30 in the morning, and I'm
oh,
still at it.
oh, were you twitching today?
Yeah, well, sure. Yes, doing my Twitch stream, productivity stream.
Nice.
So yeah, got that. Uh, yeah, I launched Kindle Vella today, another one, and
Which
I
one
have
did you
another
launch
book coming out.
today?
Mosswood Apothecary, my
Ooh.
LGBT cozy fantasy adventure.
Oh, so
Um,
fun. I'll have to go
yeah,
subscribe.
sure. I You don't subscribe, but sure.
You would subscribe on
You
Vela.
can
You pay
follow
with
the
the
story.
tokens. Yeah, you do the
You do the
thing.
tokens, you
You do
add
the
the
token. You put the
cents into the
tokens in the
little
slot. You say, "Give me the story."
give me the
Amazon's like,
story.
maybe.
Maybe we'll see. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's how that works. Okay. now that we got all that out of the way, we can talk about, I don't know, a book or something. You
No, I
ready?
want to know more about the Vela. I also want to
Oh,
know
fine. Okay.
earlier we were on a Zoom call and your camera started shaking and you said, please excuse my house shaking. Please explain why
I
your
don't
house
under
is
okay,
shaking.
I only have noticed this like week, but like a train goes by and they are like, I don't know, half a mile away and it
Can I
shakes our house.
can I imagine? I know you don't live in Chicago, but I'm gonna imagine that it's an L train in Chicago going by your
It's
house.
okay, sure, you can imagine that. I mean,
Okay,
it's
thank
not,
you.
but okay. You're wrong, but sure.
No, don't. Come on, keep it the way it is. Okay, so yeah, that's really funny. It shakes your whole house.
It does. I don't understand. I think I mean, I this is on a laptop, so it's everything is super sensitive. So like a little bit of movement progressively gets worse. So the camera's just like rah, and I'm like, I don't feel anything, but the house is shaking. So
That's amazing. I love, and I'm hoping that someday we're on a Zoom call and like part of your house falls down. Not the part
great.
that you or your partner are in,
Excuse
but just like
you.
another a part that
Okay.
no one's in.
I'm glad this is recorded so that I can report this later.
Like where the goblin door is behind you. I hope that like the goblin part of the house falls down.
Sure.
It's a different part of the house in my mind. It's that door leads to a whole new sector of the house where the
Sure.
goblins live. And
Okay.
don't change it. Keep it how
Okay.
it is.
I'm
Okay.
gonna let you believe that.
Yeah.
It'll be the story.
Yes. All right. Should we start the book now? Have I
Yeah.
has my mania driven you? I can I just say the last time I did a book and you were a very good co-host. I'm probably not going to be as nice. I am planning to say multiple times already, I don't get it.
Great.
So
I love
just
that
to,
journey. I'm so excited for this. New year, new Jeff.
this is no, it's the same. You know better. This is the same Jeff.
Great.
Um, yeah, you're like, yeah, this is what my experience with writing with Jeff is like. Is
This is why it actually is joints with Jeff, because you can't suffer otherwise.
true. All right, take us away. What book are we talking about?
Okay, I have it here. You're gonna need a
Ooh,
bigger story by Houston Howard.
Houston
Here's
Howard.
my gripe about this. Are you
Good
ready?
name, by the way.
Houston Howard, fantastic name. It is only available in paperback.
No way.
Only.
You're going old
Period.
school.
No, no, sure, whatever. But it is a really good book. The reason I'm actually talking about it, and I've talked about it before on Right Away podcast like a couple years ago. I cannot get this book out of my head, so I thought that it was a good place to bring it
Yeah.
up.
Also,
Um,
no podcast exists but my podcast. All right, keep going.
sure, okay, whatever. No, no, I love this book. I have such a big gripe about it only being in paperback, but I think that and I'm gonna put this little nugget in there for everybody. I think that as we go to learn what this is all about, I believe that is like a meta level thing that is happening, and I refuse to believe otherwise.
Oh, I won't rob you of that story. That's I get the Goblin Door. You get the it only being paperback is
Yeah,
intentional by the author as some kind of game he's playing and not just
yeah.
the publisher being like, no, I don't want to make an
There
audiobook.
there are also references in this book to books that do not exist.
Yes. Oh, this is I'm already so excited for this journey.
So again,
There are refer-
I think there are
there are
meta level things.
references in this book. Why? Okay, why have you brought this book? And why do references to non-existent books exist in this
Again,
book?
I think it's a meta level thing. We'll figure it out as we go
Oh my
along.
gosh. This is everything I needed on this Saturday afternoon.
Great, great. I have tears already because you're making me laugh. Um, okay, so you're gonna need a bigger story is like honestly one of my favorite things to talk about because it is all about how to craft story worlds and universes that extend across multiple platforms. Um,
Ooh.
so we're talking not just like books, but like comics and obviously in this it's talking a lot about films because most of this is coming from like the screenwriting universe.
Yeah.
But um
Somebody should tell him about this thing that we do called the podcast that I'm the only one that does.
yeah,
He could
yeah,
he could put
exactly.
it into that too. Yeah.
Well, so I mean like it's all about these big ideas and I'm just gonna talk over you, that's fine.
You have to.
Um but it's all about the concept that big ideas get the lion's share of attention. So when we think about media, more than likely you're going to think about Marvel, Star Wars, other franchises that are very big that people talk about. They create waves and they push boundaries. Um, and that's because they have massive story worlds. They have universes that extend across multiple platforms. No longer is Star Wars just a movie, but they have novels, they have TV shows, multiple points of entry. And so that's really what this book is talking about, and encouraging people to start their journey creating story worlds instead of kind of figuring things out. I mean, take Lost, for example. Lost was designed as a pilot episode, and the showrunners talked about how hard it was to keep trying to expand the world as they went. Like they lost the plot because they didn't have a story world when they started. So what are your
Inspired
thoughts
by a book
there?
called The Third Policeman, which is a
There you go.
fun fact. And if you read The Third
Ooh.
Policeman, which I made the mistake of doing after watching the second episode of Lost, I was like, oh, I completely understand this and where it's going, and now I'm sad because I can't enjoy the mystery of it anymore. Yeah,
Oh,
ruined it. And
well.
Third Policeman is just okay. Um, yeah, that's fast. I'm excited for this journey. I I'm pumped. I'm actually thinking about writing a larger world story,
Mhm.
so I'm excited about this. And you and I wrote a larger world story with Nerds. It's got a big world to it.
We have lots of potential there for
Lots of potential
reasons.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
If somebody would get off his ass and write chapter 16, we could keep moving. But it would that would be me, everybody. That's me. That's on my ass.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's yeah. I'm pumped. It's great.
So one of the big like terms that, and I don't have any like presentations like you had last time. I don't know why you did that.
Did
That
I
was
do
ridiculous.
presentations last time?
You did like a PowerPoint, and I'm like,
Yeah,
that's
I
not
did.
happening when I
I
do
came
it.
ready. I came
Like
prepared.
you're lucky I took notes.
It's pretty funny.
Just saying.
Yeah.
Um, but no, one of the big concepts of this is something that he keeps referencing, which is called a super story, which
Ooh, super story.
ooh, super story. It is made up of three things, which is powerful emotional connection that communicates meaningful truth, online and offline community building and outreach, and then something called transmedia storytelling. Uh, I feel like
Say those three
you and
again.
I, powerful emotional connection that communicates meaningful truth.
Okay.
So emotional connection, meaningful truth. It's two in a one.
Okay.
Online and offline community building and outreach.
Okay. I'm
And
suspect.
then that one's
Keep going.
suspect. And then transmedia storytelling.
Okay. All right. All right. Keep going. I'm less excited. All right. Go ahead.
You're less excited.
I'm less
Go
excited.
on. What are you less excited
Okay.
about?
He presents these three things. Does he say you have to start with these in mind? Because none of the examples we were just using started with these in mind. Like Star
No,
Wars
it's
was like, I'm going to make a samurai movie
right.
and in space.
In space.
And Marvel was like Stan Lee being like, I'm going to draw a comic. Oh, that worked. I'm going to draw two comics. Oh my gosh, I have an empire. Right? Like, Tolkien, which is another one that I'd say is one of these like super stories you're talking about, started with Tolkien being like, I'm going to write an encyclopedia of a foreign world. And C.S. Lewis was like, put a goddamn narrative on it, please. And he was like, okay, fine. Like, so I don't, is he saying that, or are these chronological? Like, do you start with the powerful emotive story and then you do the offline and online and then you do the transmedia? Maybe I just need to wait to hear more of the book
I don't
before
know.
I begin my
I don't
doubting.
I don't know. You got excited over here. I will argue. I think when we created Nerds, we weren't just like, I want to write a Ghostbuster story. We sort of developed the world pretty big before we honed in on a one location and one thing because we wanted to answer big questions.
We did, but we didn't plan nor have we accomplished transmedia storytelling.
No, no.
Yeah.
Transmedia storytelling is what a super story is. We start off with a story and we
Okay,
develop
that's
into
where I was
a
asking. I
super
was okay.
story.
I'm just
Yeah,
gonna
yeah,
shut
yeah.
up and let you continue. I
No, no,
apologize.
no. I like this. This is fun. We'll just keep doing this banter.
This is so we haven't done this where you're on the other side, but this is how I read all nonfiction books. I get
Hmm.
to like I'll get into like the intro and they'll be like,
Yeah.
here are the five things we're going to talk about. I'm like, well, this is bullshit. I don't like,
Well, I
and then
hate
I
you
have
just
to
rip
keep
out those pages. Oh.
reading and I'm like, okay, all right, I see what you're saying. I'll back down. I'm sorry, but this is how I
All right, all
engage
right, all right.
with all nonfiction books. My
Great,
initial
great.
reaction to the summary is like bullshit. Yeah. Anyway,
So, as a representative of Houston Howard, whom I've never met, I'll just continue this.
who we've already established may not actually exist, might be
Well,
a
may
member of a
not.
super story
Just a
in another
part of
transmedia.
this.
Yeah. Okay. Keep going.
All right.
Sorry.
So, differences between multimedia and transmedia is a big thing because I think that um, when, and especially when I first started reading this is what I was thinking about. Multimedia is just repurposing the same story across different formats. They're adaptations, Twilight books going into movies. Um, I would say I'm trying to think of what thing it is, and I can't off the top of my head. But
Like The
anything in
Last
which,
Airbender. They made a cartoon
yeah,
and then
exactly,
they
The
made a
Last
2 hour
Airbender.
movie and then they made a Netflix series, which is really
Yeah,
good,
they're
by the
all
way.
adaptations. They're
Yeah.
good. Well, some of them are good, but
Yeah. The movie's
one of them is not.
trash. The movie's trash. But
But
it's,
those are adaptations.
yeah, and that would you say is
Yeah.
multimedia?
Exactly.
Okay.
And so that was one key thing is this is talking about transmedia, which it expands a story world by telling new stories in different media that adds to the narrative. So it doesn't extend the experience like you might say a ride at Disney from a movie like Cars, where you're experiencing the Cars movie, but you're learning nothing new about the story. It's not doing that. Same as the BBC radio play of Neverwhere. We get to listen to a bunch of actors read Neverwhere. We don't learn anything new from Neverwhere. That's not transmedia. That's just multimedia.
Gotcha.
It's a new format. Um, Transmedia is all about creating like a cohesive ecosystem. And one really cool example he kind of talked about as like how old this kind of concept is was, and I figured you would appreciate might be the Bible. And referring to how before it was translated into English, people learned through hymn, sermon, stained glass, and plays. Like these were all pieces of transmedia that before it was added into one book, that's how people learned were through these different experiences and they all added into each other into a cohesive ecosystem.
Super true. Most of the theology we have is not in the Bible,
Yeah.
but comes from those um like passing along and interpret the midrash, if you will, of the story that
Yeah.
surrounds it. Yeah.
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 Um
I just put on my theology hat there for a minute. You notice how my voice got all serious? I was like,
it did. I was like, are we gonna
now
have
I'm
a
gonna be
moment?
old Pastor Jeff. Anyway,
Cool.
yeah.
Old Pastor Jeff.
Old
Hi,
Pastor.
I'm old Pastor Jeff.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Bible. That's my true accent. I wasn't mocking Southern people. That's actually how I sound. All right, go ahead.
Um he defines transmedia as having three storylines at a minimum,
Ooh,
is in at least three minimum platforms or three mediums or platforms is what I meant, existing in one narrative universe, and I don't agree with this one, but having no repurposing. I disagree with that. I think that us as authors, ignore that last one.
what does that mean by one repurposing?
Having no repurposing, so
Yeah, what does
like
that mean?
no multimedia, which is
So
probably
like
why there's only a book in paperback version
interesting. That's fascinating. But at the same time,
and no audiobook.
he's not transmedia because he's just if he had a commentary on the book that was audio or a
He
podcast
has
about the
he
book.
has a workbook, which is then transmedia.
Okay, that's fair. That's really funny. Why no
Yeah, it's
repurposing? Why not?
I think that he pulled this definition from someone else, if I remember correctly from the book. But regardless, I disagree. And I don't think that we as authors need to follow that. I think that the whole point of this and reading this was to understand how I can expand my story world in a way that isn't just audiobooks, isn't just paperback and ebook, but how do I make my story bigger?
It's
Um,
it's an interesting thing. Is it around the like authenticity of the original implication of a media form?
I have no idea.
You
I
read
would
the
have to
book.
look through this book, and it is the I didn't take those kind of notes. I'm
Okay,
not an
that's fine.
annotator.
That's fine. Um, yeah, no, that's fascinating. The no, you're right. The no repurposing seems to be outside of the circle because you would think it would be like put this in every place that you can possibly put this all the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I I don't know if that was like old hat Hollywood trying to define what transmedia is
Hmm,
and whatnot, which is
interesting.
feasible, but
Yeah.
I disagree.
Yeah, I'm just fascinated about it. Okay, so what do you mean by three storylines?
Uh, I think that the next portion might help explain that a little more
Okay, I'll just wait.
because there are two types of media that he then goes into discuss, which is West Coast media and East Coast media.
Oh my gosh, this is
Um,
so old school Hollywood. Okay,
I
West
know
Coast
it's so
media.
good.
The, yeah.
But these have examples, so that's where I can kind of explain the three
When was this
storylines a little
written?
bit clearer. This is like 2015.
Okay. All right. That's not as old as
Yeah,
I want it to be.
no.
Okay, go ahead.
Um, but regardless, West Coast media, it creates multiple points of entry for an IP. Um, and usually this is the sort of thing that generates revenue from multiple streams. There's a lot of cross marketing between and a lot of interconnection. So when we think about West Coast media, we can think about something like The Walking Dead. What I
Mm,
don't mean is the comic to show, because that's an adaptation. And I also don't necessarily mean the spin-offs that happened after the show, because again, we're in the same medium. They're additions to the story world, but that doesn't make it transmedia yet.
okay.
What made it transmedia was the Telltale games, the video games,
Okay.
uh, making new novels and having a board game that explore new and untold stories. So that's by his definition of transmedia, having these different aspects.
This feels very nitpicky.
It's very nitpicky. I don't think that we need to care about that as authors. I think that we need to care about this midpoint of like spin-offs
Yeah, this
and
feels like a
new stories.
this feels like an ivory tower discussion of like, well, is it transmedia or is it multimedia? And
Yeah, yeah,
I
it
would be
does.
like, I don't care. People buying the story. I don't, you can be call it whatever the hell you want. Yeah.
100% agree.
Yeah. Okay.
I agree. No, I think that sometimes we read things and we go, I disagree, and it doesn't matter because I can find ways to use this in my own way.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds great. Yes, sure. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
please,
yeah,
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 sequels to my books,
yeah.
not transmedia. Okay. Can somebody
Yeah.
please make transmedia out of my books? That'd be awesome. Like, let's do that.
Yeah,
Does he
yeah.
talk about how to like set yourself up? Am I jumping ahead again? How
I
to
don't
set
know.
yourself up to have transmedia?
Oh, no, because this isn't for authors. This is just a general statement
Oh,
for,
just the general storyline.
yeah.
Okay. All
This
right. So
book is not for authors.
we're reading John Trudy is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
that sounds great.
Um, this is
That
for
wasn't a
people who
shot at
have
John Trudy. I love John Trudy, but he
this
also
is for
writes
people
in like,
who
yeah,
have the
academic
income
genre. Sorry, go ahead. I'll stop
to
talking
do
over you.
movies.
I'm
No,
sorry.
it's fine. But no, so what I mean there with when you ask like what does that mean with three storylines? I don't mean a single series. I mean interconnected series.
Okay.
Um, so for example, the other co-author that I have to not be named,
Yeah,
um,
he doesn't exist.
doesn't exist. But we have a series that is set like 30 years before this series that we are going to be working on. It is interconnected, but it's its own storyline. Therefore, it becomes a new entry point for readers.
No.
It has it has things that interconnect the two, but in no means do you have to read one over the other in order to understand one. You could honestly just read one of the series and be fine with it, or you could jump to the other one at either direction, which makes it multiple points of entry and sort of like this cross marketing sort of thing because they have this interconnection, but they're not required of each other. Um, and that's how I'm like using this book to understand what these statements are, and especially the differences between West and East Coast. So, two more examples of West Coast media: Assassin's Creed. There's like
Mm,
12 games. There's 17 spin-off games. There's a novel series, comics and graphic novels, short films, two feature films, and they're all things that don't interact with each other in the way that you have to see one over the other. They all stand alone, but people get incentivized to explore and maybe pick up another game or pick up the novel series just because of that interest between them.
hmm,
Um, Fight Club, which I didn't know some of these, but um, there was a comic that was made after Fight Club that makes you change the way you see the film, which makes that an additive comprehension, but it's not like you have to have read or have to have watched Fight Club in order to have read the comics.
hmm. Interesting.
There's apparently a rock opera that was in the works as well that never happened.
I've
Fun
not sad
fact.
about that.
But yeah,
By the
another
just
West
side
Coast.
note, that movie doesn't hold up well. That book doesn't hold
Good
up.
to know.
That is a pre 9/11 book, and
Yeah.
dropping two towers in the middle of a populated city, which is how
Whoop.
the movie ends, is not cool anymore.
Not cool.
It's not. You get to the end and you're like, oh, he's kind of Osama bin Laden in some ways. Like it's just
You're like,
not.
oh no.
Oh, this doesn't hold up like it did. This was fun in the early 90s, but
Yeah.
not now that we know what this actually feels like. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
Anyway.
Um, Marvel obviously is West Coast media. Downsides for this is there's sometimes difficulty with innovation because these become very rooted in traditional media with a lot of expectations.
Hmm,
It's it can be kind of rough as writers if you're writing in a story world to leave that genre too much. If
hmm,
you're writing in a story world, let's say your first series is I don't know, like this, a dark paranormal academy. Um, it would be more difficult to write a romance series that's interconnected with the two and have this sort of intrigue to jump into one or the other. Now, if we went paranormal romance, yeah, sure. If we leaned more into the horror, again, yeah, sure. But like jumping to an entirely different genre within a story world can be difficult.
yeah, I think Marvel's a good example of that. Like, they did their primary MCU movies that were very
Hmm.
true to, I think, the tone of a certain brand of the comic books. And then they moved to like Disney Plus storytelling. They started to expand how they told stories. Like, they did Werewolf by Night, which is more of a
Yeah,
classic horror that would definitely be in that transmedia fall in, and people didn't get it. They're like, I don't get
yeah.
this. It's great, but people were like, I
I
didn't get
liked it.
this.
It was really good.
I did too, but my sons especially were like, wait, how does this relate to Endgame? I'm like, it
Yep.
does, it doesn't, it does, it doesn't. And then they did like She-Hulk, which I loved, which is
Again, loved.
a like legal comedy, like an Ally McBeal type comedy. And
Yep.
yeah, people were like, this isn't Marvel. I'm like, no, this
Yeah.
is Marvel. But yeah,
Yep.
anyway, yeah, I get it. It's
No,
tough.
that makes perfect sense too. And
Yeah.
like I think too, their expansiveness gave them the chance to make those risks, and
Mhm.
still we see that they struggled. So what does that mean if we try it? It's kind of like, I don't know if you want to do that. Um, if your intent is you know, money, I guess.
Well, I think part of it is you have to earn the right to do that too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, so back to your Dark Academy thing, like, could you write a horror off of a Dark Paranormal Academy movie? Sure, but you have to really earn that fan base
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so that's West Coast media. You can kind of see how there's multiple points of entry is really the big key there.
Hmm.
East Coast media is super dependent on like a prime story for context, meaning, or understanding. Um, it will innovate your experience with that media, but it's more like adding pieces to the puzzle of something that exists. So,
Interesting.
for example, the movie Interstellar had a comic called Absolute Zero. It talks about what happened the first attempt to cross that wormhole. There was like a group that did it first. If you read that comic without Interstellar, it apparently doesn't make a lot of sense. It is
Mm,
intended to add to the movie experience, but that movie experience can be enjoyed without it. So it's not like a two-way street sort of thing.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so that's kind of what East Coast Media is.
You're like
It
expanding
adds
off a
to.
core.
Exactly. Like Star Wars Rebels apparently had a game, a mobile game, that gave information about the places explored in the show. Again, made a lot of sense when you watched the show, but when you didn't really know what the purpose of the game was. Um,
Yeah, and I'd say
Twilight,
that's
yeah.
true off of all Star Wars stuff. Like, they have a single timeline
Hmm.
that they just keep adding to. But if you don't understand like Jedi's and Luke, it would be really tough to jump into Rebels. I think it would be tough to jump into Rebels if you didn't understand the Clone Wars. Like if you didn't get,
Yeah.
yeah, it would be tough to jump into the next one. And Mandalorian would make no sense if you didn't understand Bubba Fett and who he is and all that. Yeah.
That's a good point. And it's honestly like I think I think you are more correct than the guy in the book. Because he talks about West Coast Media having Star Wars, but you're right. Like there are some key components that are based off of the original to the point where you need that context in order to understand some key facets of some Star Wars media. Not all of it. And there's
Yeah.
always the opportunity to have intermixed in the media that you write being both West and East Coast media, quote unquote.
Yeah.
It's not like you can do one or the other. I mean, one of these examples was Star Wars Rebels, the game, but yet he calls all of Star Wars West Coast media. So just for
Interesting.
clarity there.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Um, Another one, a Twilight. Apparently, there was a short story that was called "The Short Second Life of Bree Tanner."
Yep.
That
I
was a
read it.
digital novella, in between the eclipse and
Mhm.
New Moon and the eclipse. It
Yeah.
gave context, but without
Mm,
it, it gave
a,
context to a
li-
certain character.
a little bit. It follows. There's like a side character that gets murdered pretty fast, and
Hmm.
it tells kind of her story of becoming a vampire, and
Yeah,
yeah, but it is true. Like if you hadn't read Twilight, you couldn't read that. That
yeah,
it's like addition to, yeah.
yeah, yeah, and like that's sort of the concept of what East Coast media is these that sort of thing.
Yeah, so West Coast media looks like a spider web.
Yeah,
East Coast media looks like a spiral.
sure.
We're coming out from a centerpiece, right? Like you've got to have a centerpiece.
Yeah.
And we're like, it looks like a wagon wheel. That's better.
It's yes and or yes maybe, but like there was something else he talked about. It was either like Dawson's Creek or Gossip Girl, but at the time that the shows were being released, there was like some type of blog that was happening in real time as the shows were being released.
Yeah, that was
That
Gossip Girl. I remember that.
okay, and like that's East Coast media where it's only relevant when you are in line with the original in Prime Media, and outside of it, it makes little to no sense, or it may have missing context to it. So I don't know,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, I would put like Tolkien then kind of in East Coast media because there's a
okay,
lot of stuff that happens around the Tolkien. There's artwork, there's things that people do that are like, I'm creating art of this period. Amazon just produced a new show, but that new show is a prequel to the existing story. There's like the
hmm,
Silmarillion, which is like, here's the kind of encyclopedic version of this, but they all revolve around the Lord of the Rings. They're like
yeah, like
positioning
if
themselves
you,
before and after, but they all have to be in that before, after, or during. But that core story is totally necessary to understanding the piece.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I would say I would agree with you that at the very least, it's more East Coast than West because there's this expectation that you have context, that you know the original, and I
Yeah.
think that the reason why I like these two definitions is it helps me to plan and understand what kind of story I intend to write. Um, in the Leah Ackerman universe, I would say that there are a handful of short stories that we interconnected with events that happen in the core story. And I would probably lean them closer to East Coast media, where they make more sense when you have context to the
Mm,
entire story. Sure, you can read them separately, or you can read them first and then get into this series, but there's a lot of context that exists within the original series that it's meant to be more of an additive feel. Whereas the series we're planning to write is meant to be a very different vibe, allow people to come in through that doorway and then maybe find these other pieces.
yeah, it is an interesting like conversation. I think the first series I wrote with my friend Corey, we wrote it East Coast style, but we should have written it West Coast style.
Hmm.
We have very different story ideas, like radically different story ideas. We kind of built the world to compromise both of our story ideas.
Hmm.
And then we went off to write, and he's like, I'm going to write this part of the timeline. You write that part of the timeline. It would have been way easier if we were like, you know what? Let's just take different characters, and these don't need to connect. They
Yeah.
don't need to be the
Yep.
same. They can be in the same world and be the same thing. I think we just didn't know that didn't recognize that that was a possibility. So I think it's do you have a preference?
I I personally would, for anyone that is looking for writing these kind of story worlds, I would lean closer towards the West Coast. And I would probably prefer that West Coastness
Mm-hmm.
because especially when starting out, the opportunity for you to have a wider span of doors for people to walk into
Yeah.
as opposed to a single corridor with windows that you can look out and grab pieces from. Which one are you going to pick? You're going to pick any of the doors and
Yeah.
one of them might be your corridor. You know what I mean? So, um, I would lean more towards West Coast and then the opportunity to develop them more. As we were writing the Leah Ackerman series, it was really fun to explore those pieces, and it didn't take a lot of time and effort to add in those short stories.
Yeah.
Um, and so like when you're deep into a series and you want to like basically serve those fans that love it, there's no harm in creating those sorts of like East Coast like short stories.
Yeah, I think I really do lean toward the West Coast spider web of interconnectedness through a world. I think but part of that is just my brain as a writer. I like to find little tangents and run on them. Like I remember when you and I were writing Nerds, we have a whole chapter where the protagonists discovered that Chi Chi's restaurants were actually a secret base for their nemesis.
Oh, that
And
was so good.
I really wanted to write a series of short stories about the people working in a Chi Chi's who
Yeah.
were also trying to, yeah. So it's actually still in like the
And
back of my head. I'm
and to
like trying
make
to be
that
a
West
waiter and also like being a Ghostbuster at the same time. Like,
right, right. And so I mean like honestly though that could be made in either direction. It could be East or West Coast. It's just dependent on how much context you require from the original.
yeah,
If you come in and you have a character who either can tell the reader some way or another who they are and what they do
yeah,
without having to be like, I'm a nerds agent and you know what that is, and then just like do their
yeah,
thing. Um,
yeah. Well,
then
and
you would have
we said
West
that
Coast.
it was actually the Fox agents that were the Chi
Yeah.
Chi's people, and part of
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
like
yeah,
I'm
thank
just
you.
gonna write it from their perspective and just be like, this is what we do. We grind down
Yeah,
ghosts. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And then yeah, that would be a really fun West Coast piece.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Uh Another thing I was thinking of is and this is more West Coast media, but it's The Matrix. You've got the original movie and then the sequels. You have the Animatrix, which then takes
yeah.
animated form. You
And it's a
don't
different
need
storyline. They
it's
don't
different
overlap.
storyline.
Yeah.
You don't need to watch the originals at all. You could have
Hmm.
watched just the Animatrix and thought they were really cool.
Hmm.
Um, post-apocalyptic machines take over. There's a video game. Um, as well. And the really cool thing is, like, the video game, you don't have to have context. However, if you do have context, there are there's in the movie and in the animatrix and in the video game, there are convergence points.
Hmm.
And so it's a really cool storytelling method in which if you are a fan of the series and you want full context, you can cross over these platforms and you can see these convergence points and get a fuller picture of the story. And
Nice.
if you're just a occasional fan, or you only want to watch the movies, you still get a great experience without having to go into those other pieces.
That's very cool. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that was something that he kind of talked about in here, and that's where like my brain started to explode. And like I really appreciate this book because of the way that it made me think about how to tell stories through different mediums, even as a writer. Our mediums become serials, novels, short
Hmm.
stories. We can do audio, we could do podcast. Technically, this podcast becomes a piece of transmedia for You Need a Bigger Story, because we're not talking explicitly about this, we're adding context to it. Um,
Yeah.
so, I mean, even that becomes its own thing. So, I think that it made me think about how I can expand on story worlds instead of just creating new ones over and over again.
Yeah. I like that. That's very cool.
Um, one of the I have a lot of notes, but one of the big things that I think was important as well was finding your soapbox early on. And that's the like theme that you care about, the strong opinion. He has some formula. It's like call of action because of your opinion on the topic. So, for example, a soapbox could be do everything in your power to save up the money to purchase things outright because debt is a subtle but very powerful form of slavery. Or take your time with a relationship and let it develop slowly because love at first sight doesn't really exist. But whatever that soapbox opinion is, the whole point of like being this storyteller and telling these big stories is that you're not just spewing a story, you have an emotional feel about whatever it is that you're trying to tell, and you're conveying it through these
Hmm.
different pieces. I mean, that was the one of the three core things of super stories is having a powerful emotional connection that communicates meaningful truth. And you find that through developing this soapbox.
Hmm. And this is kind of like, I guess, your theme statement
Yeah.
that connects. That's really interesting because I think my assumption is, and I think what we've been talking about is like stories that exist in a single world, but it's interesting to apply a theme to that too. I mean, like stories that exist in a single world, but the world exists because of X theme. Am
Yeah.
I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I would I would argue that Brandon Sanderson's Casimir is part of this. It's a story world concept. And he realistically they're on entirely different planets. Different things happen on those planets. 90% of the time no one knows about other planets existing.
Hmm.
Um but there is this like one through line character that exists throughout the whole thing. And I think that by interconnecting them and having that intrigue of this character who has this question mark around them but appears all the time causes people who see that
Hmm.
a new point of entry into a new more series and a new thing to grab onto. And I think
Yeah.
that overall he has like Brandon Sanderson has this sort of topic, and I cannot put it to words at the moment, but he has something he clearly has to say. He writes a lot of words about them. So I think whatever his soapbox is, that's what I see.
Nice. I like that. And I really like the idea of the soapbox behind these because I think a lot of times we're like people like Star Wars because Jedi's have glowing swords.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's why people actually connect to Star Wars versus Star Trek. Like I think there's a deeper theme. You know, there's a theme behind Star Trek that's like the future is bright,
Yep.
and the answer to obtaining the bright future is how we connect to one another. Like that's a very
Yeah.
like Star Trek kind of. I don't know if that's what Gene Roddenberry would say, but like that's how I would. If I look across like the transmedia of Star Trek, I'm like, they all have this like, if we all just get along,
Yeah.
this is
I
going to be
mean,
great.
I would argue he probably did have something to say about that. I mean, the amount of things that were a first for television because of Star Trek. I mean,
Yeah,
I
oh, it's
think it was the
huge.
first, yeah, first
Yeah,
black woman and white man to kiss on screen. I mean,
yeah, one of the first black women to have like a position of actual like uh, authority and power in a specifically in a sci-fi show, but really in any
yeah,
large story at
yeah,
all that wasn't designed for black people. Does that make
yeah.
sense? Like, yeah,
And it was as if it was written in a future where, and what a lovely thing, where it doesn't matter because it doesn't. And I
yeah,
think that that was really what the soapbox is like, we need to we need to emulate this as our future where it doesn't these things don't matter. We need to work together and we need to look at like the betterment of just existing and bringing people in to this sort of equal playing ground.
yeah,
I mean,
totally.
yeah,
Yeah, and I think on the other side of that, I would say Star Wars's theme is actually very dark. There
yeah,
is a like, especially as they've expanded the universe, there is a theme of like power ultimately corrupts,
mm-hmm,
regardless of
yep,
who has it. It all
yep,
like even in the last movies where in some ways Luke has like villainous aspects to him, there is this like, power has corrupted into a direction that um the virtuous hero who was the dirt farmer has now become the problem, right? Like it's that
yeah,
he's not evil, but it was his fear that set new evil in motion, right? Like, does that make sense? He's responsible for Kylo Ren in essence.
yeah. But I agree. I also think that there's some sort of like underlying thing because at the end of the day, most Star Wars stories have a like positive note. And it's almost like power corrupts always, but hope will prevail, sort
Yeah,
of thing.
maybe there's like resist. Maybe a way to phrase that would be like there's hope and resistance.
Yeah,
The
something
Star
like
Wars
that.
stories are at their best when you have the oppressed resisting. That's when
Yeah,
they're at their worst, Boba Fett, when you lose that aspect of
yeah,
the yeah, when you
yeah.
lose that. Yeah, that's really fascinating. I could talk about that for the rest of the day, so we need to not encourage me to do that. Yeah.
Well, I just have I think one last thing that I think is hits on all the three pieces. Let's see,
Okay.
because I said oh, super story, powerful emotional connection that communicates meaningful truth. That's what we just talked about.
Hmm.
We also talked about transmedia storytelling, what that is. And I think as a final thing, it's the online and offline community building and outreach. So
And this is where I start to, you'll have to
I see
explain
you
this one to me.
sigh.
I start to call bullshit on this because I'm like, you're not actually in charge of that, right? Like,
No, but I
there
think
has to be
that
a fandom created around what you do that's interested in participating in that because you can set
100%,
up all the blogs you want to. It doesn't all the like
100%,
networking areas you want to. If nobody's coming, nobody's coming, right? Like, yeah, sorry,
100%.
that's my
No,
cynicism before you get to the
no, I
actual.
fully agree. I only have four notes here, and I think that they are a level of helpfulness.
I'm the worst student ever. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
And I'm not even gonna look at the book, and I'm just gonna interpret these as I have them written. So, community is not an audience. We cannot control that. I agree.
Hmm.
But, an audience is someone that you sort of talk at, community is someone that participates. And how to get people to participate is having news, which I am terrible at, but having those sorts of newsletters coming out, that information coming out that becomes accessible to people, either through social media, through email, or whatever. But a way to get people insight. We all know this. That's why everyone talks about newsletters and everyone's apparently terrible at them, including myself. Um,
I
Another
disagree, but
one.
I want to hear your other four before I'll come back to it.
Um, and again, I don't think that these four are, I don't know what it says in the book. I don't think they're requirements. I think they're how can you do something about it if you want to build a community, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, a roadmap, I think, is something I will probably never do, but a roadmap to what your plan is, especially in like the movie verse, that's how people get hype over things. That's how people get interest over things. Is like,
Hmm.
what's coming out next year? What's coming out then? Like people always want that sort of thing. Um, Access being another one. Um, being accessible, however that is, but being able to respond to things and being a forward facing doesn't necessarily mean showing your face if that's not your brand, but I think regardless, whatever that is, being accessible. And the last one that I always love is collaboration. I
Hmm.
think that if we want to tell bigger stories, uh, this may include things like co-authoring. It may include things like collaborating with a narrator, collaborating with an illustrator,
Hmm.
to get comics, to get audiobooks, to get onto podcasts or whatever it is. But I think that without that, if you had none of these, it would be nearly impossible to create a community, let alone creating an audience.
Yeah, I think something, and here's where I want to push back on the news thing. I think I would say, as somebody who used to professionally create communities, news isn't enough. You need ownership.
Yeah.
And news, the reason news isn't enough is it's a power imbalance. It is
Hmm.
me telling you what's coming. It can generate hype, but it doesn't build community. What builds community is giving them ownership over what's going on. So like, one of the reasons people love Star Trek is because of the conventions,
Hmm.
because they could dress up and they could pretend to be the characters, they could pretend to be the thing,
Yeah.
they could go to the convention and they could take ownership over what was happening. And like, part of the reason we love, that there's so many iterations of like Star Wars is because we all had the toys growing up.
Yep.
And with the toys, we were able to like take ownership of the storylines ourselves. Same with like, GI Joe, which is another one of those like stories that I would say has that transmedia feel, or um especially Marvel, right? Like,
Hmm.
there's so many, like, how many kids, myself included, tried to draw their own Marvel comics,
Right.
right? Like,
Right.
and how many comic book artists are comic book artists now because they read like Spider-Man and they were like, I want to take ownership of this thing. I want to do my own version of this. I want to participate in what's happening. And part of what Stan Lee did that was brilliant was he wasn't like, no, I'm the only one that comes up with storylines and this guy's the only one that draws the comics. He was like, yeah, no, let's get as many people in here as possible drawing
Yeah.
different. And I think the downside of that is that if you are successful, you have a community that has a voice. That's kind of where Marvel is right now. Like, they have a problem in that, like,
Yeah.
they have a rampant community that are like, you suck when you do this thing. And it's like, can you guys, we're having fun. Can you guys relax?
All right.
But there is a
I
like,
loved the Marvels. I just want to toss that out there.
my 10-year-old, that was a superhero movie built for him. There are
So good.
lots of cats.
Oh my
There
God.
was
The
singing and
stupid
dancing.
cats.
There was singing
That
and
was
dancing.
ridiculous. I loved
He
it.
loved he loved the world in which there was singing and dancing was super brightly colored with like huge rainbow,
Yeah.
everything. And like, is that is him in an like that is everything. He's got this coat right now that is this is I'm just gonna diverge here for a second. He wears a coat right now that is a rainbow coat. And it is
Uh-huh.
like red, white, pink, and blue tie-dye esque splotch, like splotch art esque
Okay.
rainbow coat. And he loves it. It is his favorite thing in the world. And my wife recently she put it on her Instagram. She was looking at the coats in our closet because I have 5 kids,
Yep.
and My other three boys are very traditionally masculine. And
Yeah.
so to have a boy that is not traditionally masculine has at times been tough for him because he's like, how do I fit into this? She was doing a video of his coat closet, and it it's all like all of my other sons and my daughter, who's also very masculine, gender flipping, like she's athlete heart. They're all dark, and his coat is the one rainbow in there. And she was like, this is the family. Perfectly. And he saw it. He saw the picture and like the caption she'd written. He started bawling because he was like, this is like, mom understands me. Anyway, that's a huge side
That's
note. But
adorable.
I just wanted to say that like I think there is a problem in that fan base in building community. When you give people ownership of things, they have ownership of things, and that can be a
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I think there's a gauge there as to when you start creating that ownership and when you giving people ownership of things right away may not be the best idea.
Yeah.
Does that make
I think
sense?
too, I mean, like, because we're talking explicitly about Marvel, and I think too, the movies, the original movies gave permission to a certain group of people that are very vocal
Hmm.
about the opinions of future movies. And I think that I love the direction that Marvel was going or is going. I
Hmm.
loved the Marvels, love WandaVision. I love those stories that are being told. And I
Yeah.
think that they just need to keep moving forward and being like, we're not who we were 20 years ago.
Yeah, well, and that's part of, I think, you're making choice. Every choice you make in your universe is in some ways like creating or removing fans. You're
Yeah.
opening up aspects. Like you're saying, you're opening up portals to that universe, multi
Yep.
points of entry to other people. And some people are going to get mad about that. They'll be like, I don't want
Yeah.
those people in my world. And then you, as the creator, have to make a choice. Like, do I keep this
Yep.
closed, or do I open this up to other groups that might enjoy this? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Agreed.
I will say the Marvels is the only point of entry that he likes the Marvels and he likes WandaVision. Those are the 2 points of
Did
entry that he
did he
cares about.
watch Kamala Khan, Miss
He
Marvel?
didn't yet, and I need him to because it's so artistic and so bright.
I
Like the,
loved
the
it.
art in it is
So
so
good.
beautiful. Like they do the street art thing all the time where they're doing this, and
Yeah.
it's just beautifully done. And he
Agreed.
hasn't, well, one, he doesn't watch that much TV, so what I let him watch is
Gotcha.
selective. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's one of those things that I think it's a good point of entry for him.
That's a
Yeah,
good one. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Um, but in terms of the story, I mean, like there was a whole chunk about like how to write, and I was like, no, I don't want to talk about that.
yeah.
I liked it. It was good, but yeah, yeah. I talk about this book a lot. I think that it has good intentions, and it has a good way of understanding how to tell types of stories and focus on how to broaden a story world.
I feel like you've given me some really good questions today to ask myself when I'm like building a world or building a story, asking
Yeah.
like, hey, is this a one-off or am I looking to build something that is going to expand beyond this? If I'm looking to build something that's going to expand beyond this, how is that
Yep.
happening? Is it just a continued storyline, or is this like, should I be designing for a world that like maybe other people could also add to? Right. Like, and that's a
Yeah.
question of like, if I'm building something that other people could add to, what does that mean? Right. Like, I think
Yeah.
that's a good,
Are
yeah.
we gonna expand nerds? Is that what I'm hearing?
I mean, I got to write chapter 16 first.
I know.
Um,
We gotta write chapter six. We gotta finish
I,
chapter. We gotta finish book two.
I really love nerds. It's interesting. You and I had a conversation about this, about the structure of the world after season one, after we wrote season
Yeah.
one. I was really thinking the world was much bigger than you were thinking it was. And that's how I
Oh.
would define artists, because you were like, no, this is the only outpost they have. I'm like, no, they have an
Oh
outpost in
yeah,
every
I
major
remember.
city. What are
Yeah.
you talking about? Because I was already thinking like, man, I really don't want to write like the New Orleans version of
Yeah.
nerds at one point. And I can't do that if there's only one outpost. I was like, I needed, and we actually shifted season one to like be the bigger universe. But yeah, I've always
Yeah.
had a bigger nerds universe in my head, that are away
Maybe
from these characters.
maybe we have like a nerds podcast where we report on The ghosts.
The ghost. Well, you remember when we first started, I was posting some Instagram stuff. I never, time is always a problem, but I was finding graveyards and posting Instagrams about
Yeah.
graveyards, about like,
Yeah.
hey, here's another nerd's Instagram. Like I still kind of want to do that because I
Yeah.
like finding weird graveyards everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. We need to increase the hype
Increase the
around
hype.
nerds.
Yeah. Yeah. Please. Yeah. Anyway, go read Nerds, guys.
Go read Nerds.
That's yeah. Go read Nerds,
Available
people,
on Kindle Vella
and
and
you can just
Kindle.
buy the paperback. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. All right.
The
Well, thanks
trunk
for
it's
bringing
right
us.
behind
This was
me.
a good book.
Right here. Yeah, it was a good book. You need a
Yeah.
bigger story.
You
Only
need a bigger
available in
story.
paperback for $30.
It's hysterical. All right. I'm gonna
Ask your local
I'll
library. Okay.
I'll hit stop and we can talk a little bit more.
All right.